a quick introduction. Bob today will be talking about his experience with Atlantic salmon and also with sea-run brook trout. I'm really excited to hear about this. And I think most of this will be in Labrador.
So here's the deal. We're going to talk about Labrador and fishing, but we're also going to weave a lot of real life through it and a lot of fishing through it and so on and so forth. So I think it's an entertaining and informative presentation. And before I begin, I always like to mention that this presentation would not be possible if it were not for Colin McCune at the New Fly Fisher. The long and short of it is, and I'll get into this, it's by the way, if I'm wrong about this, let me know. But in prepping for this, it was mentioned that you guys have a strong and long attention span. So I don't have to give you the 30-minute version of this that I have to do when I'm at a fly fishing show. And if it wasn't for Colin and his efforts to supply me with just what I think is nothing short of incredible video, this would be not anywhere near as good as it is. So a big thank you and shout out to Colin. All right. I titled this slideshow, Labrador, Land Where the King Still Reigns. So the very first time I ever gave this presentation was in Albany, New York. And I taught trigonometry, pre-calculus, proofs in geometry, a little bit of physics over the years. And I know a glossed over look when I see one. I know when people do not get what I'm saying. And as I'm giving this presentation in the beginning, I'm talking about this place called Labrador, and absolutely nobody knows where Labrador is. So considering I'm speaking to Canadians, I'm sure you know where Labrador is, but the purpose of this slide is to get everybody to know where Labrador is. I consider it Alaska East, okay? It's way, way up there, and it is, you know, we live in New York. It's like as far above New York, say, as Florida is below New York. So it is in this beautiful, pristine northern country where salmon are still populous. And we'll talk a lot more about that later. Now, Labrador is vast. It is largely unsettled. It is pristine. There are more moose in Labrador than there are human beings. Because of that, there's not much, there's not many factories. There's not a whole lot of civilization. So the land being untouched is largely the way it was several hundred years ago. And several hundred years ago, there were very good salmon stocks in North America. Now that's not true, but back then it was true. Now, I consider Labrador to be like where the Yosemite of Ansel Adams meets the land before time. It's just rugged, beautiful, granite-filled country. It's an anachronism. It's a living echo of eras gone by, and it's that nexus of Yosemite and fish stocks before overpopulation of people. And it's allowed the fish to thrive and to stay in there. But rather than have me keep telling you about how the fish have thrived, let me show you how the fish have thrived. I have hooked the most electric salmon. I never could have imagined it would be this good.
Well, I can tell you that if this weren't something special, I don't think you'd take the effort to take 3 airplane rides and a float plane and land here.
It's a long way to go and it takes a long time to get here, but it's worth it. I guess I just like to say that I'm very pleased that they were able to save it as a fishery for guests.
I think salmon are a metaphor for the way life kind of should be in a way.
You know, this is a fantastic lodge.
Of all the types of fishing, fly fishing goes higher. It reaches up and it reaches in. Fly fishing for wild trout is a profound cleansing and cathartic experience. Fly rotting the salt, my buddy Kenny used to say, that's fly fishing on steroids because everything is really strong. It's an adrenaline rush. But there's always been a group in the know. Now, I give slideshows on false albacore. As a matter of fact, just today, I got my guide's license for the Delaware River, and I guide down here on the Delaware. I have a drift boat, and if you've never caught a Delaware River rainbow, that's something you should get the opportunity to do. And an unbelievable, phenomenal fish. Talk about them another day. But I would give slideshows on false albacore, saltwater fly fishing, Delaware River rainbows. And as I would walk around the room, I would inevitably find a gentleman, a little reserved, most likely with white or no hair like me. And as I walk by, he'd kind of pat my leg and say, one day you'll know all about Atlantic salmon. And I needed to know why. What's the point? Well, kings, presidents, and legendary competitors like Ted Williams called the Atlantic salmon the king of game fish. In fact, I read this book when I was in high school by Ted Williams, Fishing the Big Three, and he concluded out of tarpon, bonefish, and Atlantic salmon that Atlantic salmon were the greatest game fish. Now, I have fished Gaspé, I have fished Miramichi, and there's not anything wrong with those places, but it's not the kind of fishing that you just saw in that video. And in Labrador, I learned why the Atlantic salmon is the king of game fish. This is the St. John River in Gaspé. We literally fished here for 2 days, and the guides, they have this box that they lower into the water and they look through. It's kind of like an SLR camera. And there were, most of the pools that we had on our zones, there were no fish in the pools, okay? We did average about a fish a day in Gaspé each for my buddy Eric and I, and that's remarkable. It really is. It's an extremely high catch rate. But in Labrador, oh, forget it. In the Miramichi, I fished for a week and I had 2 pulls. And the 2 pulls were the most action anybody had for the weekend. At the time, it was my first salmon trip. I went with much better salmon fishermen than I was. In Labrador, you saw the video of how salmon were just jumping as they swim by you in the river. It's literally as if you were out in the ocean and you could just see pods of dolphin coming by and just leaping out of the water and kind of playing around you. The salmon are like that in Labrador, and we'll get a little bit more into that, but here's some truth. When you fish Gaspé, you're almost trying to seduce the fish. They tend to have been pounded. They hunker up on the bottom, and you're fishing often with spey rods, which I love, and you're fishing deep, and you're trying to tease them up. Even the nature of the flies, a fly like the Picasse or the Jones Special, they have tremendous action built into those patterns to trigger a strike. In Labrador, it's not like that. The fish attack the fly in Labrador. It's an entirely different game. Now, the number of salmon are dropping at an alarming rate worldwide. They're now a fraction of what they were in the 90s. And the scary thing is scientists are not exactly sure why. Clearly, there are probably more striped bass between Gaspé and the mouth of the Miramichi than there are on most of the rest of the east coast of North America. And as the salmon smolts come out the rivers, the stripers are destroying them. But there's also nets, and there's the methods and technologies that lead to offshore harvesting are incredible. Plus, of course, there are environmental factors, and that leaves the population of salmon dwindling. If I had one answer, I think that would make a lot of people happy, said Tommy Linenarsi. He says the new Atlantic Salmon Research Chair at the University of New Brunswick, Fred Wariski, who is the chairman of the Canadian Rivers Institute Management Board, said the salmon levels that he has seen on the Miramichi are the lowest ever. Pretty frightening stuff. According to the Atlantic Salmon Federation, the average fishing success, adjusted to include releases, was about a quarter of a salmon per fishing day in Quebec. And Gaspé is part of Quebec. That means fish 4 days, get 1 fish. So when my buddies and I are getting about a fish a day apiece, we're doing incredibly well. The lodge does not like when I talk about numbers landed in a week because there are some regional laws, but I can tell you that in a week, I'm hooking a minimum of about 75 fish. I'm not landing that many by any means, but I am hooking that many. In fact, one of your club members really convinced me to go here, and he did better than that. And I will tell you more about that in a few minutes. So this graph shows you the abundance of 2C winter salmon. That's the brown graph. 2C winter means it's a real salmon. It's not a grilse. Grilse being same exact species as a salmon, but it's only spent 1 winter out in the Atlantic. And the green line is the conservation minimum. And what happens is if you have as many fish as the green line spawning, you can maintain current populations. But if you have less than the green line spawning, then no matter how they reproduce, it's very hard or impossible to produce as many salmon to maintain the populations, which is one of the dominant reasons why you see the population decreasing. Now, when Ted Williams wrote his book, it was in the 70s to the early 80s. I know that because I graduated high school in 81 and I read the book in high school. So back then, look at how many salmon there were. So you could expect to go out on any given day and you would have many, many encounters with salmon. Nowadays, take a look at them. As of 2016, far fewer. Now, if we divide Canada into regions, the brown region is endangered. The black region is special concern. The yellow region is threatened. There is an extinct area, but that was basically down in the USA by Maine. And if I don't know the difference between endangered, threatened, what was the black again? Special concern. I don't know the difference between all of those, but none of them sounds good. All of them sounds horrific. However, the green means there's no risk. And if you look at the green, you've got the north of Newfoundland and you've got Labrador. And the more north you go, the more it's not at risk. What is it that draws you to fly fishing? Well, is it the beauty of the areas where you fish? Is that what it is that you really enjoy about it? The fact that you can get out of, say, a cubicle or a concrete jungle, and you can go out into beautiful areas and fish in places where you feel that you're more the person you want to be. Is it gorgeous fish that you can catch? Absolutely beautiful fish. And by the way, that fish was caught on the Leaf River in northern Quebec. Is it a hog? You want a monster. You're out there, you're going to chase that big fish no matter what. Is it the filling up of your senses? Like that John Denver song, Annie's song, you fill up my senses. And I literally, I know the smell of the Delaware River. My senses come alive when I fish because I love to feel the thump, thump, thump of a fish. I love to, there's a moment where you know they're going to jump. There's the smells of the forest. There's the sights of the bugs and the fish's reactions to the bug. Is all of that sensory overload that you absolutely love? Is it pure, unadulterated power? This is a false albacore, and this fish, what it can do muscle and strength-wise is absolutely mind-blowing. Well, what I could tell you, and I think the point that Ted Williams was getting at, is no fish packs it all together the way Atlantic salmon fish. They are the essence of these qualities. They possess the power of a saltwater life, but all of the beauty and the confines and the sensory explosion of freshwater. When you look at them, you can actually see their regal nature. It is the king of game fish. And Salmo solar in the Latin means the leaper, and that's what they do. They jump like crazy. It's remarkable. Now, one of the really cool things about Labrador is it's an area where the dominant way of fishing is with what they call the riffle hitch. In my trips up there, I've averaged about a little over 10 fish a day hooked up, say 10, 11, 12. My best day was probably around 15 or 16. And every single fish, every one of them has been on the surface, which is truly mind-blowing that you're catching fish like this on the surface day after day after day. Now, at the point of this V is the fly. Up there, we fish a lot of hair-winged salmon flies. If you look under this brown V, you can see the beginnings of a wake coming off that fly. And what happens is the fly itself is being swung, just like you would swing a fly on a spey rod, but you're swinging it on the surface. And when you swing a fly on the surface, you create that V wake, which is universally acknowledged by predators. Now, there's another advantage to this that really gets at the heart of the matter. And let me show you a little bit about the riffle hitch and what we do with it.
Our guide for the week, Mitch Head, explained to me where the fish are holding and detailed how I should present my riffle hitch wet fly.
So, Mitch, you've taken me to a new piece of water. Can you explain where you want me to put the fly, why the fish are here, and how you want me to present it?
The fish are laying here right on the edge. You see the seam of this fast water and the slow water.
Yeah, where the foam is here?
Right where the foam line is. Fish are laying up there. They're sort of getting into the main current. It's not so rough progress making their way upstream, right?
Mm-hmm.
So for presentation, like if you put the fly, actually get it in that fast water so it sort of swings in across.
Right
over them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't know if you noticed there, but the hook was turned to its side. And apparently in the origins of this riffle hitch technique, which started in a city called Portland in Newfoundland, that Portland hitch was designed to turn the hook to its side because Atlantic salmon so often take on the turn, and it's a much better way of hooking. Now, as far as how to do a riffle hitch, it's easy. You can do a turtle knot if you prefer. You can do a clinch knot, but this is how you make a riffle hitch. You create your knot, whichever knot you're going to go for. Make sure you put some spit on it so you don't burn it and weaken it. Now you make a half hitch and you put it so the line comes off on the upstream side of the fly. And what happens is the force of the current will elevate the fly to the surface. The stronger the current, the less half hitches you need. If it's a very strong current, you probably only need one half hitch. If, on the other hand, it is a calmer section of water, 2, maybe 3 half hitches will be necessary. But this will elevate the fly to the top of the water column. Now, if you go to Labrador, the dominant type of fly that's used is a hair-wing salmon fly. This is about the simplest salmon fly I can imagine. It's called a blue charm riffle. And the first year I was up there, I caught as fish or more fish on this fly than any other pattern. Size 6 and 8 are the dominant sizes fish there. Sometimes you go as small as a 10 or a 12, and sometimes as big as a 4. But size 6 and 8, you go with a box full of those. Okay. This is an Undertaker. This is a Warren Duncan pattern. It's a classic fly, and it's such a good pattern up there that my personal guide, every time I'm going to leave and I leave him his tip for the week, he also reaches into my fly box and takes every one of my Undertakers. So I have to tie him again for my next trip that I'm up there. Rat flies have worked very well for me. This is a variation of the silver rat. There's your rusty rat. My guide is a guide by the name of Humphreys. And Humphrey and I went out one day, and in the morning, Humphreys fished this fly, which is a white-winged thunder and lightning. And I fished an Undertaker, which is a classic and exceptionally good salmon fly. In the morning, Humphreys landed 9, I think it was 9, might have been 8, but I think it was 9 Atlantic salmon he landed. Not even grills. Every one of them was a true Atlantic. By that, you're looking at a 7 or 8 pound fish and up. His biggest one was around 15 or 16 pounds. It was a really nice fish. I fished an Undertaker and I did not catch a single fish in the morning session. We caught a couple of brook trout, cooked them over an open fire for lunch. And in the afternoon, I said, hey, Humphreys, let's switch flies. You take my Undertaker, I'll take this fly. And in the afternoon, I landed 5 and Humphreys didn't land any. So for whatever it's worth, on one day, at one point in time, pattern mattered. So I always bring this fly with me just in case. Well, what makes Big River so special? And I think to begin to understand that, it really helps to understand my story a little bit. I am a retired school teacher and coach. And a trip to a place like Big River is not a cheap trip in any way, shape, or form. And I knew that normally speaking, I wouldn't have had, at the time, it was about $6,500. I wouldn't normally have that kind of money to go fishing. But if you're a teacher in the United States, the really cool thing is that at the end of June of every year, before we get our summers off, we get a massive paycheck. And then our pension checks kick in July. So I knew I would have play money the year I retired that I would never have at any other point in time. And I had been through a really tough time with the cares of the world. If you just look at like the previous 15 years before I retired or so, the first thing that started it was the first home we ever built or had, I rebuilt and I sold it at a profit. And my wife had come to me one day and she said, listen, I want this house over here. And, you know, a good man is a provider and he provides for his family. So you go get the house for your wife that your wife wants. Okay, we did that. Then we had to fix that house up a little bit. A lot of work went into that. Then my best friend, a man named Kenny Turco, whom I love very, very much. I didn't know it was possible to love a man as much as I loved him. He wound up passing away. And then my dad passed away. Then my father-in-law passed away. And then my dad wound up spending, before he passed, 6 months in a hospital in the city as a quadriplegic. And I needed to go in and visit him 3 nights a week for my grandfather for 4 years. And my whole life growing up, every single time I ever needed anything, my grandfather was there for me. First time I bought a house, he didn't give me the deposit. I had to pay it back, but he made it so that the bank could see the deposit and I could get the house. He did it the second time I bought a house. First car I ever got, my grandfather took care of me. So at 92 years of age, my grandfather broke his back. There was no way I was leaving my grandfather to fend for himself. So 3 or 4 days a week for 4 years, I was in there taking care of my grandparents. My grandmother suffered mini strokes. We had to take care of her. My oldest son, he got caught up in some stuff he shouldn't have gotten caught up in. I had to take care of that. Both of them went to college. So for about 7 or 8 years, I was working from 7:30 in the morning until about 10 o'clock at night because I refused to let my kids leave with debt. And then, of course, there was your final average salary that you need for your pension. So I worked. At some point, you ask yourself, is this all that life is about? And I said, nope, it's not. I'm going to go salmon fishing. So I went salmon fishing. And to do it right, I researched where was the best salmon fishing in the world. And the first place that I researched was the Kola Peninsula and specifically the Pinoy River. Now, we're a big dog family here. We have miniature Australian Shepherds now. In fact, I have a litter that's growing out. And we also have Central Asian Shepherds. And our Central Asian Shepherds are a breed that's very popular in Russia. So I have a lot of Russian friends. And they all told me, do not go to Russia. I said, what do you mean? They said, well, everything in Russia is a bribe. And you have to know who to slip what to get from point A to point B. Don't come here. You don't even speak the language. And I also have a lot of friends who fought in the Desert Storm, Iraq wars, Afghanistan. And they all told me that they use those Russian helicopters. And they said, they're very dangerous. You want no part of those. So I crossed Russia off the list. But at the time, the highest catch rate in the world was on the Pinoy River. Then I looked at Iceland. And Iceland is a wonderful place to fish. It's a great place. And I thought about going up there. But the problem with Iceland is that all of the prime weeks, the best times to be there at the best lodges, they're all booked. So you're never going to get into those prime weeks. It's simply not going to happen. So I decided not to go there. And then one day I was talking about this, believe it or not, with Bill Spicer. And Bill Spicer said, Bob, I know the place for you to go. And I said, where should I go? He said, you need to go to Big River. And I said, why should I go to Big River? And he said, well, I hooked 91 in a week. I said, what? He said, yeah, I hooked 91 salmon in a week. I said, that's incredible. He said, yeah, go there. So I reached out to them and I said, listen, I really want to go to your place. Is there a way that I can, this was 2 years before I retired. I said, is there a way that I can pay a deposit and then you hold my spot? And then when the time comes, I pay. They said, absolutely. So I wound up going up there. That was in 2016 when I gave the deposit. In 2017, I'm pretty sure, it became the highest catch rate in the world. So Big River, it has that good of fishing. Now, I just described to you what a decade plus of my life was like. And I wouldn't trade it for anything. I loved everything I did. And I don't want it to sound like I'm complaining because it was a great experience. I grew closer to my dad than I ever had before. My grandfather and I, the bonds we shared were fantastic. And the respect that I get from my sons for what I did for them, I wouldn't trade it for the world. It was really great. And to know that my wife was able to get the home that she really wanted for the better part of 20 years of our life together was really, really, really cool. However, stress is a very real thing and it wears on you. And when you start thinking about, is this really all that there is in life? It's a very real thought that crosses your mind. And obviously there's religious implications, and I'm not going to get into those, though they are very, very, very important to me. But I do think that it's okay to go fishing. I think it's okay to catch some Atlantic salmon. So the first day up at the lodge, I'll tell you about in a couple of minutes. I wound up going 0 for 13. It was an amazing day, but I had 13 salmon on and I lost every one of them. The second day I did really well. And the lodge actually has Wi-Fi. So I came home and I posted these pictures on Facebook. And my sister made a comment that was really, really true. And what she wrote was, it's been a really, really long time since I've seen you smile like that. And she was really spot on. It was just truly a fantastic and an epic experience. But it didn't start off that way. It didn't start off that way because I went 0 for 13. In fact, one of the fish that I lost, I'll never forget this fish as long as I live. In fact, I tend to think we remember the ones we lost more than the ones we actually landed. But I hooked this fish and it jumped. And it jumped literally higher than my head. And I have some photographic evidence to prove this a little bit later. But it jumps higher than my head. And in that instant, I looked down and all of my line was in a big tangle. And as the fish jumped and it arced across the beautiful Labrador sky, I saw all of that tangle heading up to my rod. And time slows down, like when you're in a car accident and you go, oh, and the line knotted, caught on my reel handle, and all you heard was pow. And the fish broke off, dancing and wiggling water. And it was one catastrophe like that after another the very first day for me. I get back to the lodge, and this is where things, I believe very strongly that there's a purpose to everything that happens in life. I get back to the lodge, and Colin says to me, how's your day go, Bob? And I said, well, Colin, I'll tell you what, because we spent a week together up there fishing. I said, Colin, I went 0 for 13, but I had the most incredible, remarkable day you could possibly imagine. And he said, oh yeah, what do you mean? And I described all of the fish that I had lost and how I lost every one of them in detail. And I didn't think anything of it. The next morning, I went out on the water with Humphreys, and I said, Humphreys, he asked how I was doing. I said, Humphreys, I'm feeling frustrated. And he said, why? I said, Humphreys, I went 0 for 13 yesterday. I never go 0 for 13, but I went 0 for 13. And at that point in time, I recalled why I went 0 for 13. Have you ever heard of the law of cosmic fly fishing payback? It's a very real phenomenon. It really, truly is. It says that for every one great and amazing thing that happens to you in fly fishing, there will be multiple horrible things that happen to you in fly fishing. It is just the nature of our pastime. So about 2 weeks before my trip to Labrador, I was fishing the West Branch of the Delaware River, which is a great, great fishery. And they get a summer sulfur hatch there that hatches at about 12:30 or 1 o'clock in the afternoon until 5 o'clock. Then it takes a little bit of a break, and then it starts up again in the evening. And I know this one particular willow tree where there are more 20-inch brown trout under this willow tree, probably than anywhere east of the Rockies. And I managed, Joan Wolf, if you know who Joan Wolf is, she actually drifted behind me while I was fishing under the tree. And she said, how are you doing? I said, well, I got this one good fish working. I think I can catch him. She goes, oh, the psychiatrist bills I have for trying to catch fish out from under that tree. So she drifted on by me, and I wind up catching the fish shortly thereafter. And I landed it. It was 22 3/4 inches long on a size 20 bar emerger, and it was on 7X tippet. And I would never have been able to land this fish, except it stayed out of the main current. There was a down tree on the downstream side of it. Behind me was the main current. And when I got the fish in, there were weeds draped all over the 7X leader. I lunged for it with my net. I lifted it up in the air. I start doing the happy dance in the middle of the river. My buddy I'm fishing with gave me the finger from upriver. I'm sitting there happy as a clam, and then I just stopped. And I knew that the law of cosmic fly fishing payback would rear its ugly head. And no doubt, all of a sudden, fast forward 2 weeks, first day, 0 for 13. The two events are intimately related. When I was feeling frustrated, I said that to Humphreys, and Humphreys said, buddy, what have you got to be frustrated about? You are fishing in a beautiful place with beautiful flies for the most beautiful fish in the world, the most exciting fish, the Atlantic salmon. He says, buddy, you don't have a care in the world. And with that, I relaxed. Great fishing is not being a great caster. It's not tying the world's most perfect fly. It's being at one with the environment around you, feeling it, becoming absorbed into it. When you get that kind of relaxation and presence in the environment, everything just flows. And from that minute forward, everything flowed. And I started catching and catching and more catching. This is a place, when you go there, there are several places you fish. There's an area in front of the lodge we'll talk more about later on. I'm not allowed to use the name of this place in public, but do you see the big, looks like an island out there? It is an island. And then this little jetty here, that's the mouth of the Atlantic Ocean. This area is so close to the ocean that the fish are not in full spawning mode. If you remember the video you saw Atlantic salmon chasing surface flies, not just the deer hair mice, not just the bombers, but the riffled hitch flies. These fish will take in two ways. One way that they'll take is like a marlin. You will see their fin pop out of the surface and they will track your fly and maul it. The other way is like a brown trout, where it'll drift and take it like a dry fly. With this primitive, powerful locations, the fact that these fish are not yet hunkered down into spawning mode, like on the Gaspé, and they're still the aggressive predator that lives out in the ocean, that's how you get so many more fish taking the fly. Now, this is one spot that you go out to. If you go there, you typically spend one day at this spot. But even the lodge itself is 4.5 miles above the Atlantic, and the fish travel there in a half a tide. And then there's a riffle and a rapid, and then they rest there. So the fish are all fresh from the ocean, chock full of sea lice, and that's why they're so particularly powerful. They haven't had time to settle into the bottom. Now, I told you a minute ago that I have puppies. We have the father and the mother in the house, and when a dog goes into heat, the male dog often won't eat for 2 weeks at a time. All he has on his mind is reproducing, and also the female dog, the same thing. And the salmon get like that. The longer they're in the water system, the more the pheromones are released, they become hormonal, and all they think about is reproducing. But here, you're so close to the ocean, and as you saw in the video, the waves of fish that are coming by you are, you will see multiple, if you fish for 2 or 3 hours at a time, which you go in shifts, if you fish a 3-hour shift, I would say on average, somewhere between 5 and 8 times during that 3-hour shift, you will see those pods of fish come by you. And as they're coming up, you just plan to swing as you see them, and they come to your fly most of the time. This is a spot above the lodge called the bathtub. It shows you the beauty of Labrador, the pristine nature of it. But this particular pool right here, you could catch a brook trout on every cast for 3 hours in that pool. It's just chock full of them. This is an area called the Great White Way, and there's about 15 or 20 miles of this water that the salmon have to go to get to their spawning area. And that's why they are such powerful, such well-conditioned fish up in the Labrador area and Big River in particular. Now, I told you before about the fish that jumped higher than my rod and I lost them. And I said I had photographic evidence coming. This is photographic evidence. This is Bob and my guide Humphreys. Bob is 86 years old. Almost all of the wading you do there is exactly how these two gentlemen are wading right here. You cast into the faster water. The fly swings across the faster water, across this seam into the calmer water that's less deep. I met Bob when I got up there. He's a car parts salesman from Brantford, Ontario. He owns several car parts stores. I love photography. You probably can tell that by the pictures that are taken. And one of the things I take a lot of pride in is getting pictures of people I fish with and giving them pictures that they can use and remember the moments. So I had sworn to Bob that I would get him a really nice picture. But this was also my salmon trip, and I was much more focused on my salmon than I was on getting Bob a fish. So in fishing with Bob, this was our last day. I mentioned before, you fish in shifts. You get up in the morning and you fish from 9 to 12. You come back in, you go back out, you fish from 2 to 5. You come back in, you go back out, you fish from 7 to 9. That's how every single day works. And if you have a fish on, or if you are working a fish, you can extend a little past the time limit. But if you don't have a fish on, or you're not working a fish, that's it. When 3 hours is up, it's time to go in. This is a very regimented British sort of style of fishing, very noble-ish. And this was the last session of the last day. I had done particularly well. I was downstream of where Bob is fishing, and it was around 20 minutes to 12, and 12 o'clock was the cutoff time. So I catch a fish, and Bob's 86 years old. I don't need Humphreys hanging out with me. Humphreys hung out with Bob. I'm fishing. I catch a really nice fish. I get him in. By then, it's probably 11 to 12, 10 to 12, something like that. I release the fish. I let it go. And when I did that, I started to race out to where I was fishing because I had 10 or 15 minutes left to catch one more fish. And this still small voice inside of me said, put the rod down. I was like, no, I got 10 or 15 minutes to catch a fish. I'm not putting any rods down. Put the rod down now. I've learned to listen to that voice. I put the rod down. I walked over to my camera, opened up the case, turned around, and took this picture. You can see that Bob is fighting the fish. His hands are in the position to fight a fish. He winds up getting the fish in. I get a whole bunch of nice pictures of Bob with the fish, and I was able to get them to him. But I then walked back out to where I was casting. I took one more cast, and I had another fish. This is incredible that you could do this on a salmon river, that you can actually walk out to a stone, catch a fish, walk in, take a picture, turn around, walk out to the stone, catch another fish. That's the kind of fishing that it has here. And this is the old camp from years and years and years ago. As you can tell, it's rustic, to give it a polite term. And this guide here, Lamond, he is actually still fishing on the river today. You'll notice the date is July of 2008. As of 2022, he was still guiding on the river. In 2008, he'd been doing it for 40 years. He was up over 50 years the last time I checked. A lot of tradition built into the camp. This was the former owner of the camp. His name was, I think his first name was Bob. I'm not sure about that. But his last name was Skinner. And they had this quiet little place all to themselves. In fact, it reminded me so much of the places my grandfather would take me fishing when I was a kid, because we had the same exact tablecloth where we would go fishing in Montauk. And it was a bunch of really good friends gathered around, enjoying Atlantic salmon. Great fishing. Well, Mr. Skinner's nephew happens to be the #1 builder in all of Newfoundland. And he bought the lodge from Mr. Skinner. And now the lodge looks like this. It's completely changed over. The meals are outstanding. I can't think of any other way to say it. I personally love lasagna. I at one point just happened to mention it to Judy, who runs the lodge, and lo and behold, one of the dinners was lasagna. These are appetizers. If you imbibe, there are refreshments available. Sometimes you go out and you fish away from the lodge for a day, and if that's the case, you have an open fire where you go catch some brook trout and you eat up the brook trout for lunch. This is the lodge. They did an incredible, fantastic job with it. It accommodates a lot of people. I believe it's 14 or 16 now. And this man over here, well, this guy over here, this is Bob, who I told you about. And this is a man who, in a short time, I grew to have an amazing amount of respect for. This is a man named Vince Hatton. Are any of you familiar with the company Corning? Now, every touchscreen cell phone in the world, they make the glass for. Every catalytic converter in the world, they make those honeycombs on the inside of it. They are a monumentally huge company, and Vince was their chief lawyer. Now, Vince is the one, and I didn't think anything of this when Colin was creating his presentations for this, but early on there was a voice that you heard say, I'd just like to say
that I'm very
that I'm
pleased
really pleased
that they were able to save it.
that
as
they
a
were able to
fishery
keep the
for-
lodge open to the
guests.
public. And I didn't know what Vince was getting at. Throughout our time up here, Vince had this raspy, wouldn't go away cough. And Vince would take me aside and he took a liking to me. He was a man's man, kind of like a John Wayne. And he would take me aside and he'd say, Bob, this is what the guys are going to tell you. And they're telling you good stuff, but I want you to know what I learned in my 26 years here. There's also this spot and that spot, and they don't really like to take people here because maybe the wading isn't as easy as it is in other places, but I've caught bigger fish here. So try those places. Don't give up on them. And then he said to me, he said, Bob, I want you to do me a favor. I said, sure, Vince, no problem. And he knew I live literally right on the Delaware River. If you walk out my house, I have a porch and then you go down to the water. The water is 200 feet away. He said, would you teach my son how to trout fish? And I said, Vince, how's about I'll take you and your son and we'll all go trout fishing together. And we'll sit on the porch and we'll trout fish all day. We'll come back, we'll sit on the porch, we'll enjoy the evening together, and you can stay at my house. We'll have a great time together. We'll do this. And he goes, yeah, just please, just take care of my son. Just teach him how to trout fish. I really want him to know. And again, I didn't think anything of it at the time, nothing. And then I found out a few months after I got home that Vince had died of cancer. And he went out the way he wanted to go out. And when you travel back to what I was thinking about, is this really all there is to life? And look, taking care of family is number one. And having a nice house is up there is real important. And love your neighbor and take care of your neighbor and do charity. All of that's really important. And it's a passion of mine. But, you know, there's not all this beauty around in the world so that you don't sample it. And to me, Labrador has this unbelievable beauty. So I wanted to sample it. And when I saw what Vince did, it just inspired me to try to be all the more like Vince was. It's a place where the cares of the world disappear and they go away. The lady on the lodge, on the left, her husband and her own the lodge. The lady on the right had never been Atlantic salmon fishing before, and she caught several that week. She didn't get 91 hookups like Bill Spicer did or 75 like me, but she still caught a good number of fish during the week and had a great time. And also, I personally prefer a really nice bathroom and shower accommodations. So you've got that too. And I make sure that I put this in here. Now, it's an ultra safe place and you never need to worry about wading or anything like that. I showed you how shallow the water is that you stand in before, and you get transported around the places close to the lodge with these Gander River boats. There's a place up above where they have a jet canoe. Down below, you get into a bigger boat that takes you down near the Atlantic Ocean. Not a cabin cruiser, but similar to that. And the old lodge still stays there. They didn't tear it down. It's now where the guides live. And to me, it has one of the greatest benefits, because when you go fly fishing, there is only one horrific moment in the trip. It happens each day, and it's the moment when you put cold, damp waders on. It's like, oh, I can't stand it. Well, your waders sit in a wood burning stove all night long, and when you step into them, they're warm and toasty, and they feel great. There's laundry machines available both here and also in the main lodge, so you are treated like plush, as you can tell by the pictures. But again, let's see a million words rather than hear them.
The first riffle and pools the salmon encounter coming upriver from the ocean are literally right in front of the lodge. The fish caught here are bright chrome, full of vigor and fight. They're exceptionally aggressive, especially on topwater flies. From dead drifted bombers to riffle hitched wet flies, skimming along the surface, the salmon hammer them all, which makes for incredibly exciting fishing. which is why bombers and also wet flies with a riffling hitch work so well. Guest Bob Lindquist from Long Island has fished for salmon in many locations. This is his first visit to Big River, and he was shocked how many salmon there are and how strong the fish can be, no matter what size they are.
I've been to points south of here 3 times. If you added up the total cost of those 3 trips, it's more money than the cost to come up to Labrador, and that includes the plane fare. Now, I've already caught in 4 days more than 3 times all the number of fish that I caught down there. And hookups and lost fish, I've caught more than 5 times as many. So in my opinion, this is a great bang for your buck kind of location. If you're going to invest money, I would rather come up here every other year than go to those places every year, because your memories are going to be infinitely greater. I have hooked the most electric salmon with the most pizzazz that I never could have imagined it would be this good. I have had salmon jump 8, 10, 12 times. I've had salmon jump across the river upwards of 8 to 10 feet and just singe line off my rod. It's been a remarkable experience that I hope to repeat year after year after year. At the lodge with me are 3 gentlemen who've come here at Big River camps for 26 years in a row. How could that alone made me say, I know I made the right choice coming up here. 5 guided days on the Gaspé, and I did this, all right? So these numbers were accurate when I wrote this a couple of years ago. It would cost about $2,800. So if you do 7 days, it would cost about $4,000. With a catch rate of 1/4 of a fish per day, according to the Atlantic Salmon Federation, you would land about 2 fish in a week. 7 days, $4,000. That's $2,000 per fish. 7 guided days on Big River, including the fly out and the 5-star accommodations, is about $8,000. I actually believe it's $8,700 today, okay? Now, if you divide that by 28, because I land about 28 in a week, that works out to $285 per salmon. So it's a whole lot more affordable, plus you get those 5-star accommodations. The thing is, when I went up there, I prayed for 3 things. The first thing that I prayed for was that I'd actually catch salmon, obviously, and then some. Caught tons of salmon. The second thing is that I would be around good people, and this lodge is just loaded with good people. It's the kind of place, when I spend money, I consider where my money's going to. I want my money to go to people that I want to make their lives better, and these are the kind of people that are that way. And the third thing was, before my family fortunes took a little bit of a turn down and I had to pay for college and you know, the inevitable happened to some of the older people in the family, I did do a tremendous amount of writing, and I was paid to go to fly shows, let alone appear to fly shows, which I still do, but I wanted to be able to get back into it. And Colin basically worked with the lodge and said, look, you should have Bob do some presentations for you. And that's what I do now. So it really worked out to be a tremendous trip. But that's not all you can catch there. You can also catch sea-run brook trout. Most of the sea-run brookies run in the 2 to 4 pound range, sometimes a little bit bigger than that, okay? But 2 to 4 is pretty common. And we will eat them for lunch. There's so many brook trout up there that you do not damage the populations by keeping a couple for a meal, all right? They're hyper aggressive. You can throw any streamer out there, and we use language like every cast, which doesn't mean literally every cast, but it means that you're catching so many fish that it seems like every time you cast, you have something. You either have a hit or you have a fish on. It's like that with the sea-run brookies. Now, this one was caught up at that place called the Bathtub, and that's an average size fish out of the bathtub, probably about 17 or 18 inches. And literally, that was every single cast. Literally, you had a fish on or a hit or landed. I keep the picture of this fish in there, even though it's a god-awful picture. First off, when you catch sea-run brookies, most of the time their color is very washed out like this one was. And it's possible that this brookie was a sea-run brookie and then made his way far upstream. But I caught him in the middle of a very fast riffle, and I had to try to hold him still and my handheld camera still and got the picture. But that fish was 22 inches long. So that's on the bigger end of what you can expect to get up there. That fish was caught in northern Quebec, not in Labrador, but that's my buddy Kenny Turco. And he said to me a quote that I have never forgotten as long as I've lived. He said, there are those who read about history and there are those who write history. I'm a history buff. I love reading about history, but boy, oh boy, do I want to write it. I want to go out there and make things happen and experience them in my life. And if you love fishing, in Labrador, you learn why the Atlantic salmon is the king of game fish. You get the beauty, the pristine, the place before man and civilization changed it. You get a fish that has the power of a saltwater fish, the beauty of a freshwater fish in a freshwater environment using ripples and rapids to help it run better. You do not need a ton of experience. If you can cast 45 feet with an 8-weight, 9-foot 8-weight, 45 feet. If you like spay fishing, you can do it. It's completely unnecessary. You stand in water shin deep, you cast it out, you let it swing across. The guide will teach you how to do the swing in very little short order. The trickiest thing to learn is how to see your fly in the faster water. Doesn't take that long. And once you have that down pat, you'll know when fish are on your fly. And then the king of game fish is yours. If that smile doesn't say it all. When clubs have big banquets, like a lot of times it's around Christmas time or in the early spring, and they gather husbands and wives and families together and they have big fundraisers. I do one for that called Just Why We Fly Fish. It's what it's all about. And it's my favorite one to give because I've had grown men come up to me at the end of it and they grab my hand with their two hands and they just shake it and they can't even talk. Can't say a word. And they just shake their head and they walk away. And to me, fly fishing, that's the greatness of it. It's the fellowship of the fly. It's a vehicle to bring us to the places that matter most in life. It doesn't matter most, to be clear about that. I think there are more important things, but it's the vehicle that gets us there. And it brings bonds that very few things in life are capable of bringing.